In the heart of the Swedish wilderness, hidden beneath layers of fog and shadow, lies a castle that the locals refuse to name after dark. Officially, it's known as Borgvattnet Slott, but the villagers whisper another name in hushed tones: Mörkets Återkomst, or the Return of Darkness. The castle's silhouette dominates the landscape, its jagged towers piercing the mist that clings to the forest floor. Built of dark stone, it stands isolated from the rest of the world, surrounded by dense woods that seem to swallow sound itself. It is a place untouched by time, where even the birds refuse to perch on its crumbling walls. Stories of Mörkets Återkomst go back centuries. According to local legend, the castle is Kurseda, a place where shadows move when they shouldn't, where whispers echo through the halls long after midnight. Those who are braver, foolish enough to step inside, speak of cold winds that cut through even the warmest nights, of footsteps that follow them down empty corridors, and of doors that lock themselves without warning. But it isn't just the stories that make this place feared. History, as it turns out, is just as grim. The castle was constructed in the late 14th century by Lord Henrik Malmström, a reclusive noble whose family name has long been associated with dark rituals and unexplained disappearances. Villagers whispered that Malmström had struck a pact with something unnatural in agreement that would grant him power and protection, but at a cost. What that cost was, no one can say for certain, but the legends claim that darkness itself began to cling to the castle, creeping in through the stone walls, pooling in the corners of rooms untouched by sunlight. Servants vanished. Guests who came to visit were never seen again, and still, Lord Malmström remained, untouched by time, until the night he simply disappeared. No body was ever found. His family, too, vanished from history, their name erased from records and whispered only as a warning: "Do not go to the castle. Do not wake the shadows." In the centuries that followed, the castle stood empty, save for the occasional explorer or curious traveler. Few returned to tell their stories. Those who did spoke of shadows that moved when there was no light, of whispers in languages they could not understand, and of eyes glowing faintly in the dark, watching from the corners of the room. Now, Mörkets Återkomst is considered one of the most haunted locations in all of Scandinavia. It draws in urban explorers, ghost hunters, and thrill-seekers, all eager to experience the darkness for themselves. But the villagers still warn anyone who asks: the castle does not like to be disturbed, because according to legend, the darkness never truly left. It only waits. The castle, known as Borgvattnet Slott, or Mörkets Återkomst, stands deep within the forests of northern Sweden, miles away from the nearest village. Its stone walls rise high above the treetops, dark and jagged, as if carved from the very shadows that linger around its base. Built in 1389 by Lord Henrik Malmström, the castle was intended to be a fortressa symbol of power and dominance over the surrounding lands. Its architecture is strikingly grim. Towering spires that pierce the sky, narrow windows that seem more like watchful eyes, and battlements that stretch across the upper floors. Still sharp and intact despite centuries of abandonment, the walls are constructed from dark granite, quarried from the nearby mountains, rumored to have been carried by hand through harsh winters. The entrance is marked by heavy iron gates, rusted but solid, their intricate designs covered in moss and creeping vines. The main hall, known locally as Dödsrum, the Room of Death, was once a gathering place for noble guests and travelers. Now it sits silent, its long oak table still scarred with knife marks and burns, the chandeliers overhead twisted with cobwebs. Some say you can still hear faint whispers if you stand there alone after sunset, voices too soft to understand, yet impossible to ignore. Behind the castle walls, narrow stone corridors snake through the interior, winding between rooms long since stripped of their former glory. Tapestries hang in tatters, their designs faded beyond recognition. Suits of armor stand silently in the corners, dust-covered and cold, their visors tilted slightly downward as if watching those who pass by. The floors are uneven, cracked in places where the ground has shifted over centuries, and faint footprints too small for any adult are sometimes found in the dust. The lower levels of the castle are where the true mysteries lie. A labyrinth of catacombs stretches beneath the foundation, carved deep into the earth. The entrance to these tunnels is hidden behind a rusted iron gate, chained shut long ago, though no one seems to know who locked it or why. Local legend holds that these catacombs were used for rituals long forgotten, rites that drew upon the darkness that clings to the castle like a living thing. Lord Henrik Malmström himself remains a figure shrouded in mystery. Historical records paint him as a man of influence and wealth, but also one with strange habits. He rarely left the castle grounds, and his interactions with the local villagers were limited to brief appearances during trade and seasonal gatherings. Whispers spread of his secret dealings, late-night visitors who never seemed to leave, lights flickering in the tower rooms well past midnight, and screams that carried through the trees on nights when the moon was hidden. Malmström's family, too, seemed to share his reclusive tendencies. His wife, Lady Ingrid, was seen only once during the castle's construction, a pale woman dressed in mourning clothes. Though no record of her death exists, his children were never documented if they existed at all. When the family vanished in the early 1400s, no one questioned it. The castle was left to rot, its iron gates sealed, its windows boarded up. Villagers stopped coming near, and the woods crept closer each year, wrapping around the castle walls as if trying to claim it. But the darkness remained. Locals would whisper about lights flickering in the highest towers, of shadows moving behind the boarded windows. Some claimed the castle still belonged to the Malmström family that they had simply never left. And so, Borgvattnet Slott became Mörkets Återkomst, the Return of Darkness, a name that carried weight in the village, spoken only during daylight hours and always in hushed tones, because those who dared to speak it after dark sometimes didn't come back. The legend of Mörkets Återkomst began long before the castle was abandoned. It is said that Lord Henrik Malmström, the castle's original owner, was a man consumed by obsession not with wealth or power, but with secrets that lay hidden in the dark. Villagers whispered that Malmström dabbled in forbidden rituals, that the lights seen flickering in the high towers late at night were not merely candle flames, but something far more sinister. According to local folklore, Malmström's obsession grew after the mysterious arrival of a traveler in the winter of 1392. The stranger appeared at the castle gates during a blizzard, dressed in a thick black cloak that trailed through the snow, leaving no footprints behind. Witnesses claimed he was invited inside without question, disappearing behind the iron gates that never opened again. After his arrival, things began to change. Workers who maintained the castle spoke of strange sounds, whispers in unknown tongues, scratching noises behind the stone walls, and the faint tolling of bells that seemed to come from beneath the castle itself. Visitors stopped coming. Servants who entered the west wing were never seen again, and through it all, Lord Malmström remained hidden in the highest tower, his silhouette sometimes glimpsed through the frost-covered windows, unmoving for hours at a time. The true horror began the following spring. A merchant caravan passing through the region reported seeing flickering lights in the forest surrounding the castle, small orbs of pale blue light that danced between the trees, before vanishing. That same week, 3 villagers went missing. 2 hunters and a stable boy, all last seen near the outskirts of the castle grounds. Search parties combed the area for days, but not a single trace of them was found. Then, the whispers began. People spoke of shadows moving in the fog, of low murmurs that came from the forest at dusk. Villagers started locking their doors before nightfall, and children were forbidden to play near the edge of the woods. But the fear only grew. Farmers reported finding their livestock slaughtered, their bodies arranged in perfect circles, eyes wide open and staring into the sky. The townspeople demanded answers from Lord Malmström, but the castle gates remained closed. No one dared to climb the hill to knock, and those who did were never seen again. Soon, stories spread that Malmström was no longer alone, that his late-night visitor had not left. Some claimed to see 2 figures silhouetted against the frosted windows, moving in sync like shadows cast from the same light. When winter returned, the disappearances stopped, and the village breathed a sigh of relief. But the whispers never faded, and neither did the lights in the tower. Lord Malmström remained unseen, the castle grounds untouched by snow despite the storms that buried the village each year. In time, the locals gave the phenomenon a name: Mörkets Återkomst, the return of darkness. They spoke of it in hushed tones, warning travelers never to approach the castle after sunset, never to follow the lights that sometimes flickered in the woods. And though years passed and new generations grew up in the shadow of the castle, the whispers endured. They said the lights still appeared, growing brighter each year, reaching farther into the village. Some claimed to hear bells tolling deep beneath the ground, soft and distant, like a warning that something was coming. But the true horror of Mörkets Återkomst was only beginning. As the years passed, Mörkets Återkomst only grew stronger. The flickering lights in the woods crept closer to the village each winter, appearing not just in the shadows of the forest, but sometimes along the edges of main street, hovering near doorways, flickering behind frost-covered windows before fading back into the mist. The castle itself seemed to breathe with darkness. Travelers who dared to pass by its iron gates spoke of whispers carried on the wind-soft, seductive murmurs that beckoned them to come closer, to step inside the crumbling walls. Few accepted that invitation, but those who did were never seen again. Locals stopped searching after a while. It was simply understood that if you entered the grounds of Borgvattnet Slott, you would not return. But the most chilling part of the legend was yet to come. In the winter of 1447, nearly 60 years after the castle was abandoned, a terrible snowstorm swept through the region. It raged for days, cutting off the village from the outside world. On the third night of the storm, the villagers heard something impossible: the ringing of bells. It started faint, just a distant echo on the howling wind. But as the hours dragged on, the sound grew louder, more distinct. It was a deep, resonant toll like church bells, but slower, heavier. The sound seemed to come from beneath the ground, rumbling up through the frozen earth, shaking the windows of the village homes. Terrified, the villagers barricaded their doors and whispered prayers to whatever gods would listen, but the bells did not stop. They rang all through the night, pausing only as dawn crept over the horizon and the snow finally ceased. When the sun rose, the bells fell silent. The villagers were too afraid to investigate. But a week later, a traveling merchant came stumbling into town, frostbitten and shaking. He claimed to have passed by Borgvattnet Slott during the storm. According to his story, the castle was alight, every window blazing with firelight, shadows dancing in the frosted glass as if a grand celebration was taking place. He heard music, laughter, voices raised in joy. But when he approached, the lights vanished, and the castle stood silent and dark once more. The merchant left the village the next morning, refusing to speak of what he saw again. But the story spread, and the legend of Mörkets Återkomst grew darker. Some whispered that the castle was hosting a gathering, one that only took place when the bells called them forth. Others believed it was Malmström's doing, that the Lord had returned with his midnight visitor to finish what he had started centuries ago. It was during this time that the disappearances began again. Not just travelers, but villagers too. Hunters, tradesmen, even children vanished without a trace, their footprints ending abruptly in the snow. Search parties found nothing, no signs of struggle, no bodies, just a line of footprints that always seemed to lead in the direction of the castle before vanishing completely. By the turn of the 16th century, the village had nearly emptied out. Those who remained refused to speak of Mörkets Återkomst, and the castle was left untouched, shrouded in mist and silence. But the bells still rang. Not every year, but often enough that the legend never died. Those who survived told their children to stay away from the woods, to avoid the castle at all costs, and never under any circumstances follow the lights. To this day, there are still whispers of shadows moving in the highest tower, of flickering lights in the windows, and of laughter soft and distant carried on the cold winter wind. And through it all, the bells continue to ring, calling out to those who dare to listen. There is a silence that hangs over Mörkets Återkomst, a kind of stillness that feels unnatural, as if even the wind is too afraid to pass through its walls. The castle looms against the horizon, shrouded in fog that clings to the stone like pale skeletal fingers. The sky above is almost always gray, heavy with clouds that seem frozen in place, casting shadows that never shift or fade. Approaching the castle is like stepping back in time. The iron gates at the entrance are rusted and warped, but they remain locked, chained with thick iron links that are cold to the touch, even in the summer months. Symbols are etched into the metal spirals and jagged crosses, half hidden by creeping ivy. Local historians believe they were placed there as protection, though no one can say for sure what they were meant to keep out or keep in. The courtyard is a graveyard of stone, littered with crumbling statues of angels and warriors whose faces have long since eroded away. Their eyes are hollow, their hands outstretched as if in prayer. But to whom or to what is long forgotten. Weeds sprout between the cobblestones, brittle and gray, as if starved of sunlight. In the center stands a fountain, its waters long dried up, the stone basin cracked and coated in moss. Some say on foggy nights, the water returns, dark and still, reflecting shadows that aren't truly there. Inside the castle, the air is dense and stale, heavy with the scent of dust and rotting wood. The main hall stretches out in silence, its grand chandeliers swaying gently from chains that haven't moved in decades. Cobwebs hang like curtains from the iron fixtures, thick and glistening with moisture. The walls are lined with portraits of the Malmstrom family, their faces faded, their eyes strangely sharp despite centuries of decay. Villagers who have snuck inside speak of those eyes, following them as they pass, of whispers too faint to understand, drifting through the empty halls. The floors creak underfoot, the sound carrying through the long corridors. Some say the noise isn't just from old wood, that it is the castle itself, shifting, waking, reacting to the presence of the living. Doors slam shut without warning, locks click into place, and windows that were once sealed are found gaping open, curtains fluttering as if someone had just stepped through. The West Wing remains the most feared. It's the only part of the castle that still appears untouched by time. Dust never settles on the furniture, and the walls remain pristine, as if cleaned daily. But the real horror is the clock. There is a massive grandfather clock in the center of the West Wing, its hands frozen at 3 minutes past midnight. No matter how many times it is wound or adjusted, the clock never moves. Yet, every year, on the night the bells are heard beneath Main Street, the clock chimes 13 times its echo, carrying through the castle halls, lingering in the air, long after it should have stopped. There is a massive grandfather clock in the center of the West Wing, its hands frozen at 3 minutes past midnight. No matter how many times it is wound or adjusted, the clock never moves. Yet, every year, on the night the bells are heard beneath Main Street, the clock chimes 13 times its echo, carrying through the castle halls, lingering in the air long after it should have stopped. Many have tried to spend the night in Mörkets Återkomst, but none have lasted till dawn. They leave shaken, pale, muttering about whispers in the dark, footsteps that match their own, and shadows that watched from the corners of the room. But it's the tower that no one dares to approach. It is the tallest part of the castle, its spire jutting into the clouds, shrouded in perpetual mist. Lights are sometimes seen flickering there, even though there is no power, and hasn't been for decades. Some say it's Lord Malmstrom himself, still watching from above, waiting for the darkness to return. There is a massive grandfather clock in the center of the West Wing, its hands frozen at 3 minutes past midnight. No matter how many times it is wound or adjusted, the clock never moves. Yet, every year, on the night the bells are heard beneath Main Street, the clock chimes 13 times its echo, carrying through the castle halls, lingering in the air long after it should have stopped. Many have tried to spend the night in Mörkets Återkomst, but none have lasted till dawn. They leave shaken, pale, muttering about whispers in the dark, footsteps that match their own, and shadows that watched from the corners of the room. But it's the tower that no one dares to approach. It is the tallest part of the castle, its spire jutting into the clouds, shrouded in perpetual mist. Lights are sometimes seen flickering there, even though there is no power and hasn't been for decades. Some say it's Lord Malmstrom himself, still watching from above, waiting for the darkness to return. The legend of Mörkets Återkomst is more than just a story whispered among locals. It has become woven into the very fabric of the region's folklore. For generations, parents have used tales of the castle to keep their children from wandering too far into the woods, warning them that the darkness still lingers there, waiting for anyone foolish enough to approach. In local markets, merchants sell small iron charms engraved with protective rune symbols meant to ward off whatever haunts the castle grounds. These charms are hung above doorways, stitched into clothing, and even placed under pillows to prevent nightmares. Some families refuse to leave their homes after sundown on certain dates of the year, claiming that the darkness from the castle spreads outwards, touching the village with cold, invisible fingers. Similar legends are found across Scandinavia. The Nattfolk, or night folk, are said to walk the forests around abandoned manors and castles, invisible by day but restless by night. These spirits are believed to be bound to the places where they perished, cursed to wander the grounds where tragedy struck. In the case of Mörkets Återkomst, locals believe that those who vanished during the castle's darkest days still roam the grounds, trapped between life and death, bound to serve whatever evil still lingers within its stone walls. The legend also bears striking similarities to the tale of Blåkulla, a mythical island where witches were believed to gather during the spring equinox. Just like the castle, Blåkulla is said to be shrouded in mist and protected by dark magic. Travelers who strayed too close would lose all sense of direction, wandering in circles until they vanished completely. The stories claim that the witches of Blåkulla could summon storms, control shadows, and even call forth the dead. Historians speculate that Mörkets Återkomst may have roots in these older beliefs, suggesting that Lord Malmstrom might have been part of an ancient cult devoted to harnessing such powers. Local records mention his association with a secret society known only as Soner av Skuggernath, Sons of Shadows. Little is known about the group, but fragments of old manuscripts suggest they practiced rituals designed to manipulate darkness, using forbidden rites that could bind spirits and bend shadows to their will. When Mörkets Återkomst is spoken of today, it's not just in hushed whispers of fear, it is a warning. To this day, villagers refuse to celebrate Mörkets Natt, the Night of Darkness, a local holiday that once marked the end of winter. The castle is said to be most active on this night, its lights flickering, its bells tolling softly in the distance. Some claim to hear faint music drifting from the highest tower, while others report shadows moving through the forest, flickering just beyond sight. Tourists occasionally venture to Borgvattnet Slott with cameras and flashlights, hoping to catch a glimpse of the supernatural. Local guides refuse to join them, shaking their heads at the thought of setting foot on cursed ground. The darkness there is different, one guide remarked during an interview. It isn't just shadows. It's alive. Even now, the legend endures, feeding off fear and curiosity. Stories of flickering lights in the forest, the distant toll of bells beneath the snow, and whispers that float through the fog continue to keep the castle shrouded in mystery. Those brave enough to approach never linger long, and those who stay the night are few and far between. But there are still those who are drawn to urban explorers, thrill-seekers, and ghost hunters who want to touch the darkness for themselves. Locals only shake their heads and whisper the same warning: do not enter after sunset. Do not follow the lights. And whatever you hear, do not answer the bells. While many fear Mörkets Återkomst, there are always those driven by curiosity or madness to explore its cursed halls. Over the years, stories have emerged from those who dared to cross its rusted gates, bringing back tales of horror that only add to the legend. One of the most well-known accounts comes from Lars Nystrom, an urban explorer who visited the castle in 1998. Armed with only a flashlight and a handheld camera, Lars documented his journey through the crumbling stone corridors. His footage, though grainy and distorted, captured something chilling. In the video, Lars is seen walking through the main hall, his flashlight beam flickering over decaying portraits and dust-covered statues. As he turns a corner, the camera jerks suddenly, his breath catching on the audio. "Did you hear that?" he whispers, the light shaking in his hands. There is a pause, absolute silence. And then, the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing from somewhere deeper within the castle. Lars freezes, his flashlight pointed into the darkness. "Hello?" he calls out, voice trembling. The footsteps stop. He waits, breath held, but the silence stretches on. Against all instinct, he pushes forward, turning the corner with the camera still rolling. The hallway is empty, just a long stretch of stone and shadow. Lars lets out a shaky laugh, muttering something about old pipes and echoes, but his relief is short-lived. In the video, as he turns back toward the main hall, the camera briefly sweeps over the hallway behind him. For a fraction of a second, something is there, a dark silhouette, standing perfectly still at the edge of the light. Lars doesn't notice it at the time, but those who've analyzed the footage claim its head turned just slightly, as if watching him leave. Lars left the castle that night, shaken but unharmed. It wasn't until he reviewed the footage days later that he saw the figure. He never went back, and to this day, he refuses to speak about what he saw. "I'm not scared of ghosts," he said in an interview years later. But that wasn't just a ghost. His experience is just one of many. Locals whisper about the midnight bells of the deep, echoing tolls that ring out from beneath the castle on certain nights. Those who hear the bells report feeling drawn to the forest, pulled by invisible threads of sound that seem to vibrate through the trees. A local woman named Ellen Anderson claims she followed the sound once as a child. She remembers stepping through the fog, the bells growing louder with each step, until she saw the castle looming before her, its windows alight with a soft, flickering glow. "I saw people in the windows," she recalls, dancing, laughing, like there was a grand party inside. But when she blinked, the lights vanished, and the castle stood dark and silent once more. Ellen ran back to the village, and she hasn't stepped foot near those woods since. The stories don't stop there. In 2012, a group of paranormal investigators from Stockholm entered the castle as part of a documentary series. Equipped with night vision cameras and recording devices, they planned to stay from dusk until dawn. The footage they captured remains unreleased, locked away under legal dispute, but rumors spread quickly. One of the crew members, speaking anonymously, described hearing whispers through the headset, soft and rhythmic, like chanting. He claimed the sound grew louder the deeper they went, culminating in what he described as a choir of voices. He quit the project the very next day and refused to speak about the castle again. But the whispers, those never stopped. While urban explorers and thrill seekers often share chilling stories of their time within Mörkets Återkomst, the locals have their own tale zones rooted not in brief explorations, but in generations of whispered warnings and close encounters. One of the most unsettling accounts comes from Johan Lindström, a night watchman who was contracted to guard the castle grounds in 2015. His job was simple: patrol the perimeter, ensure no one entered, and report any disturbances. He lasted only 3 nights. During an interview years later, Johan described the experience in detail. "The first night was quiet," he explained, his voice steady but eyes distant. "It was just me, my flashlight, and the fog. I walked the grounds from midnight to sunrise. Nothing happened, not a single sound. But on the second night, things changed. It was around 2 a.m., he continued, hands clenched tightly in his lap. "I was walking the western wall, where the stones are covered in moss, and I heard something. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it wasn't." He paused, eyes flickering to the shadows in the room. "It was humming, like someone was singing, but very faint." I called out, thinking maybe someone had slipped past the fence, but there was no answer. Johan followed the sound, flashlight cutting through the fog. The humming grew louder as he approached the East Wingen area marked off as too unstable to enter. But the sound was unmistakable, drifting through the cracks in the stone walls. He pressed his ear to the cold granite, straining to hear. "It was coming from inside," he whispered. "Not just one voice. It was many, singing in harmony. I couldn't make out the words, but it was like a lullaby." He left that night shaken, but returned for his final shift. This time, he wasn't alone. He brought his dog, a massive German shepherd named Rex, figuring the company would ease his nerves. But when they reached the edge of the grounds, Rex refused to move. The dog planted its paws into the mud, hackles raised, growling low at the castle's silhouette. "I had to drag him forward," Johann recalled. "He wouldn't go near the walls. He just kept growling, staring at the windows." The patrol continued in uneasy silence until Johann reached the north tower. His flashlight beam swept across the stone, catching something in the upper window. "There was a light," he said, voice dropping to a whisper. "Just for a second. Flickering. Like candlelight. And then, there was a face." He described it in fractured sentences. Pale, almost translucent, with eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. "It wasn't looking out," he clarified. "It was looking down, right at me." Johann left his post that night, abandoning his patrol and refusing to return. He handed in his resignation the next morning, telling his employer that no amount of money would make him set foot near Mörkets Återkomst again. His dog wouldn't go near the edge of the village for months. Stories like Johann's are common. Locals speak of lights that flicker in the windows at midnight, shadows that pass behind curtains even when the castle is empty. One elderly woman, Agnes Holm, shared a chilling memory from her childhood. As a girl, she and her friends dared each other to approach the castle on Mörkets the night of darkness. She remembers creeping up the hill, the fog heavy and damp when she saw them. "There were people," she said, her hands shaking as she recounted the memory. "Walking in pairs, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, holding lanterns. They didn't speak. Just walked straight through the gates, even though they were locked with chains. I was too scared to move. I just watched as they vanished into the mist." When she ran back to the village to tell her father, he locked the door, shut the windows, and whispered a prayer she didn't understand. Agnes never went near the castle again. To this day, the stories continue. Some locals claim the bells still ring once a year, soft and distant, only loud enough for those who truly listen. Others speak of shadows that gather at the castle gates during the longest nights of winter, waiting for something or someone to open the doors. But most just whisper a single warning. Do not go to Mörkets Återkomst when the lights are on, because if the castle is awake, something else is too. The legend of Mörkets Återkomst is more than just a ghost story. It's a shadow that hangs over the village, a reminder of darkness that never fully fades. For centuries, the castle has stood as a grim sentinel, its towers rising through the mist, untouched by time, untouched by light. Locals pass it by with quickened steps, their eyes fixed firmly ahead, pretending not to hear the whispers that drift through the trees. Even now, the tales continue to grow. Urban explorers share footage of shadowy figures captured in the castle's highest towers, their movements slow and deliberate. Paranormal investigators whisper of unexplainable sound bells tolling deep beneath the earth, footsteps that follow them through empty corridors, and voices that murmur their names from just beyond the flicker of their flashlights. Historians still struggle to explain the castle's history. The Malmström family vanished from public record in the early 1400s, yet the castle remained perfectly preserved for years afterward. How it has withstood centuries of storms and decay without collapse is still a mystery. Some theorize that its foundation was built on sacred ground, a place of power. Others claim it is cursed, that it will stand until the last soul trapped within its walls is finally freed. But there is one detail that refuses to fade from memory: the bells. Every winter, on the longest night of the year, the village falls silent. Shops close early, windows are shuttered, and candles burn low in the windows of every home. It is on that night that the bells begin to toll soft and distant at first, like whispers carried on the wind. Then, louder and clearer, until their echo rattles the windows and stirs the fog that clings to the streets. Those who listen carefully claim that the sound doesn't come from the castle itself, but from beneath it. Some say the bells are a warning, a call to keep away from the castle grounds. Others believe it is something much darker, a summoning, a beckoning to the shadows that linger behind its stone walls. To this day, Mörkets Återkomst remains sealed, Iron gates block the entrance, wrapped in chains and covered in symbols too old to translate. But sometimes, on foggy nights when the moon is hidden and the wind dies to a whisper, lights can still be seen flickering in the highest towers. Locals know better than to approach, but there are always those who don't listen, thrill seekers. Ghost hunters, explorers hungry for a taste of the unknown. They come with cameras and flashlights, laughing as they slip through broken fences and brush aside warning signs. But few ever make it past the front gates. Those who do are never quite the same. They return pale, shaken, refusing to speak of what they saw. Some don't return at all, and the village simply marks them as gone, another name added to the growing list of those lost to the shadows. But the bells continue to toll. Year after year, their call echoing through the forest, reaching the village streets. Some say it's only a matter of time before the iron gates of Mörkets Återkomst swing open once again, and the shadows are finally free to walk among the living. Until then, the castle waits silent, patient, watching from its perch above the fog-covered trees. Because in Mörkets Återkomst, darkness doesn't fade, it returns.